Here we go. Zoom, setting up your meeting. We're most likely live this very second. So
it says meeting is now streaming live on Facebook.
Okay,
Oh, yeah.
Here we go. Hello. 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 Hi, OAC. I'm just going to.
Hi, OAC.
So shall we? Yep. We're streaming live on Facebook. Shall we just begin, Angela? Because there's usually a little bit of a delay, and people don't just want to look at us looking at each other. So let's push on, right? Hi, OAC. My name is Karen Boyte. I am part of the board of directors of the Ontario Autism Coalition. And from time to time, we host Facebook Lives as an attempt, just an attempt, to extend some of the conversations that we have on our Facebook page. So tonight, our theme is numbers, bumblers, or show us the money.
I'd like to see the money.
Historically, governments, both liberal and conservative, make big announcements about autism spending. But do they honor those promises? How much of that money is actually spent? And if so, who gets it? Is needs-based therapy the financially responsible way to deliver service, or is it too much of a drain on taxpayers? So I usually let our guests, or I should say my victim, introduce themselves. But Angela is rather modest. So Angela, I'll do the honors and introduce you if that's okay.
Yes, thank you.
Is that all right? Okay, here we go. The brains trust. I think you're supposed to say brains trust, not brain trust. Is that how it goes?
Well, I only have one brain, so I'm not sure.
Okay, well.
Honestly, I'm ESL, so these things, I'm not good with these.
I'll put an S on it. Maybe Bruce will. Bruce will correct me. So the brains trust at the OAC is pretty formidable. Angela Brandt is no exception. A statistician by training, Angela is a mom to a teenager on the autism spectrum, and she's been advocating on his behalf for years.
At least
Angela?
Over a dozen years, about 13, 14 years.
13 or 14 years. Angela is one of the Chicks from the Six, a staunch group who for many months in the days before COVID attended question period at Queen's Park, staring down politicians from the gallery. She's hounded individual MPPs to stop their destruction of the Ontario Autism Program, and Angela knows many of the movers and shakers in this province. More importantly, they know her. Angela has organized many of the OAC's protests, set up new connections with independent agencies like the Financial Accountability Office of Ontario. And last but not least, Angela has had a huge hand in most of the OAC's studies and reports over the last couple of years. So you're a big smarty pants, right? Angela?
I was a lot smarter when I was younger, but
I feel the opposite. I feel the older I get, the dumber I get. So congratulations.
That's exactly what I said.
Oh, is that what you said?
I said I was smarter a long time ago.
Got it.
Which means I'm getting dumber. So clearly you are too. I can see that.
What I mean? This is why we need Angela. So tonight, Angela will be sharing portions of some of the research work that she's done for the OAC. In addition to this, our behind-the-scenes number crunchers are joining us too. They will be answering questions, submitting thoughts, and posting links for you to review. So thank you, Bruce McIntosh and Scott Corbett. We might see Carrie and Pat Monahan as well. Whew, I can feel the brain waves washing over me. Ready to start, Angela?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, here we go. Angela, we, the OAC, try to show governments that needs-based therapy doesn't have to break the bank, and that it's actually the most fiscally responsible way to fund therapeutic services. But let's back up a little bit, and I want to ask you, can you define two things for me? Can you define the terms needs-based therapy and core services?
Yeah, so I'll start with core services first. In terms of the OAP, the core services have been defined as ABA, SLP, OT, and mental health. And that's what core services are supposed to be delivered. Those are the services that are supposed to be delivered as defined as core services by the OAP. A clinician, on the other hand, may define core services differently. So that's it for core services. For needs-based, and I should preface everything in this portion about needs-based and core services. I'm not a clinician. I am not an expert in any type of intervention. This is coming from a statistical perspective and a personal perspective as well. So in terms of needs-based, from a statistical perspective, you're looking at an outcomes approach. So you're approaching the child in this particular case with what you want to see in terms of an outcome. And that's how you design a program. It's what you want to see at the end of the intervention. There are authentic assessments. So a lot of assessments are norms based, and that's kind of a statistical term. And what that means, it's standardized. And probably the most famous standardized test would be like an IQ test. I think, we've probably all done one at some point in our lives. And no? Okay. Well,
I wouldn't dare.
I've done a few, but there's a lot of criticism around IQ tests because they're not always generalizable to the entire population. So, if you're doing an IQ test in India versus North America, the questions are going to be different. And so there has to be different tests designed for each of those environments, but they're based on norms, right? So the average responses. And that's a very, very difficult thing to do with our kids. There are assessment tools within each profession, of course. And like I said, I'm not an expert in any intervention, but in ABA, they have like ABLES, and there are other tools that you can use, but generally for a needs-based therapy, you wouldn't use these norms-based assessment tools. The other thing that's needs-based is you provide the intervention for the duration that the learner needs it. So you don't continue with an intervention once you've reached your goal or your outcome. So that's needs-based therapy. I think the other thing is, from my perspective, there needs to be interprofessional collaboration. And that is basically a team that works together to define those outcomes and to design a program to meet them. And that's needs-based therapy.
So as you describe this, a lot of people would react quickly and say, that sounds really expensive, Angela. How does the OAC suggest that we can build parameters for something that sounds so open-ended? So if the therapy doesn't stop and you keep going, except you keep changing the program, who makes those decisions? Are we just going to bleed money?
Well, I think if we looked at data from the US, we know that the average, and I should say that every state in the US has insurance laws for ABA coverage. So weird, right? They're ahead of us in terms of ABA coverage, and every state has laws. And we know that on average, it's between 17 and 21,000 per year per child. And that's because some children have lower needs and some children have higher needs, but the average is about 20,000 per year for about 5 years or so. So it's not an unlimited amount that we need to spend per child. If we're looking at the current wait list and we're looking at 17,000, I'm just rounding, it's about 800 million. Right now the budget is 600 million. It's a little more than what our current budget is, but we don't have the capacity to meet the needs of all the children on the wait list now anyway. But in terms of what can we do for parameters? Well, we need regulation. We need strict regulation. We need regular audits. And most importantly, and this is a lesson we learned once the regionals started to provide fee for service, we need a standard rate card for autism services. So there, you know, we can't be charging $55 an hour in one place and $200 in another place. You know, there might be some exceptions when you're looking at places like Northern Ontario, that kind of thing, where it's much more expensive to run a program, but that could all be factored in when we are creating this rate card. And who should be doing it? It should definitely be like a third arm party that is a standalone. You know, I was mentioning the insurance laws in the US. Well, there they share the behavior plan with their peers, and it's reviewed by peers. And if we had a program like that in place here, then there would be a lot more control. You know, because the truth is there are some unethical practitioners, not a lot, but they exist. This is a way that they would be weeded out, because most practitioners are quite ethical. And if they saw a behavior plan that was, you know, not reasonable, they could weed it out.
So are you proposing that that is one way to, as you say, weed out greedy people? Because we know there are parents, we know that there are people who are greedy and they'll just take and take and take. Would a government be able to stop that in a needs-based system?
Well, yeah, I think so. Just like I mentioned, if we had those parameters in place, audits, reviews of behavior plans for reasonableness. And don't forget, when I mentioned needs-based therapy, I said we only provide the intervention for as long as it's required. Mm-hmm. So we need ethical practitioners to say this child has reached their goals, or they've gotten to a place where they no longer require the same intensity. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think it can definitely be controlled. Has any government done a great job at it? No, not yet. But
Angela, the community 2 years ago got hit with a really big announcement and a massive change to the Ontario Autism program. We moved from what we hoped to be a needs-based system that was clunky, but in the process of being repaired, to a flat rate system. And at the time, the minister in charge, her name was Lisa McLeod, she felt that she was championing the community by providing the same funds for all families. So it's finally fair. We'll get rid of the wait lists, and everybody gets the same amount. And good luck to you. Here's your funding. Here's your therapy. Why do you think that's problematic?
Well, for a few reasons, and we'll go to this little chart that I created actually for our press conference that we did before our rally last February. The brilliant Scott Corbett spoke at the press conference, and I created these little profiles for him to use to explain to the media exactly why giving the same amount to each child doesn't work. And so this is a bit of insider information you're going to get now. I named this lovely little girl Wendy because she's Wasteful Wendy. Very few people know that.
Wendy, Wasteful Wendy.
So she's been diagnosed. She's 4 years old, and she was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. Her needs are $10,000 a year for ABA, but her childhood budget is $20,000. So this family has a surplus of $10,000. And with that additional $10,000, Wendy's family purchased an iPad and sent her to camp, which is lovely. But then if you look at, you know what, I'm going to put it into, can you put it into
Sure.
slideshow? Oh, wait, I can.
Yeah, you've got control.
Yeah, I'm going to put it into slideshow mode because nobody wants to see previews, Karen.
Oh, you're right. You're right. The first rule of showbiz, don't give it all away. And
You
I
never
just
show
did.
behind the curtain. Come
Oh
on.
my God. Sorry.
So then we'll go to the next slide. Oops, and I went one too many. Previous. Okay, there we go. So this is live, folks.
It's all right.
So so then you have another 4-year-old here, David, and another insider piece of information. I called him David because he's destitute David.
Oh.
Yeah, I like alliteration. So he's also 4 years old, like Wendy, and he's got autism spectrum disorder. He's got a speech and language delay, and he's also got an eating disorder. His required ABA is $60,000 a year. His speech is $18,000 a year, and his occupational therapy is $18,000 a year. Like Wendy, his childhood budget is $20,000, but his family is in the hole $76,000, and now his poor family is in debt. What family can actually come up with $76,000? This is after tax dollars. Not many, and not for long, if they can.
Yes. Yes.
So this is my explanation as to, why it doesn't make sense, because, we always say in the autism community, if you've met one child with autism, you've met one child with autism, and every child has very different needs. So Wendy needed a little bit less. David needs quite a bit more. Every child needs something different, and that's the basis behind needs-based. And going back to what you said in terms of, the government not being able to implement a program, and they made a massive change, and the Liberal program was very clunky. If this current government left that clunky program and put in those parameters like regulation and audits and that kind of thing, and doubled the budget like they did, they would be heroes. But instead, McLeod is a monster. See, alliterative too, works. McLeod the monster. And everybody in that ministry really, they come off as monsters because it's inhumane what they're doing.
Can you tell us more about how much money has been wasted with the program?
Well, I can't tell you exactly the amount of money that has been wasted, but I can tell you why childhood budgets can be considered wasteful. And I should clarify that any money we spend on our children is not a waste, obviously, because our children need different kinds of interventions, even if it is sending your child to summer camp and that kind of thing. It's not a waste. The reason it is wasteful, and I'll show you what I did. I created this chart a little while ago. I used Hawaii data. I have some analysis of cost. It's an insurance analysis of cost. There's very little information out in the Webiverse. So the Hawaii data is really, really good. And basically I plotted needs of the child by the cost, the therapy cost. And that would be the black line here. So this red line, it's a linear regression, and that's basically like a line of best fit. So you can have different plots, and then this line will come in, and it's you may remember this from school or not, but you're looking at the slope, right? So what the slope tells us is if those two variables, therapy costs and the needs of the child, if they're correlated. And this line is basically telling us that there is a positive correlation. And what that means in general, it's not 100% of the case, because stats is, you know, a aggregation of data. In general, as the needs increase, so do the costs. And that's all this slide shows. But what I did is I plotted on top of that a funding level here, the blue line, and say this is the $20,000 for the childhood budgets for children under 5. And so you can see here the children with the lower needs, they are getting their needs met, but they have a surplus. And why do I call that waste? Because that money that has been overpaid can be used to meet the unmet needs of the children with higher needs. So these children in this blue circle here, they're not getting their needs met, whereas the children here are getting their needs met and then some. So isn't that wasteful? Because this money could be used to help other children. And so my argument has been, it's not only fiscally responsible, it's also the compassionate or humane thing to do, because we know from studies that this group of children that aren't getting their needs met, that if their needs were met, there would be a significant amount of savings throughout their lifetime in terms of increased independence and direct and indirect health and social supports as they get older. So the intervention money that we're spending, it's an investment. And wouldn't you want to use your investment as wisely as possible?
I can hear some people watching this who might be going, whoa, wait a second. Wait, hold the phone there, Miss Smarty Pants. For a very, very long time, there were two camps of children, right? There were kids who received intensive therapy and they got to participate in this gold standard program. And then everybody else, let's just use the term high functioning kids for lack of a better way of expressing it, got bupkis, right? Maybe a few weeks of a little bit of ABA here and there, maybe a 7 or a 10 week program, perhaps every few years of the child's life, right? And the OAC was involved in fighting for a needs-based system where all kids have coverage to the age of 18. All kids have access to therapy. And then things change very, very quickly with the McLeod government doing the childhood budgets. And what we found is that we had suddenly this very large population of people who had never.
Karen,
Yes.
those two camps changed with the Coteau plan.
Yes, they did.
Yeah.
I know I'm generalizing a little bit, but I'm
Okay.
trying to bring in the parent who is like, whoa, hold the phone. I never got nothing. No one has ever helped me. My kid, I've been waiting for 10 years, 15 years. My kid's almost 18. Screw you, ladies, you know? And I feel that person, you know? So one of the things that Laura and I will talk about, here I am stuttering, because this is a hard thing to talk about. We don't ever want to put ourselves in the position of saying to a family, you don't need this, or your kid doesn't need this.
No.
What do we know? We don't know what your kid needs.
No, and that's not what I'm saying at all.
No. So there's the rub, right? That the system that was designed for therapy changed, didn't it? And suddenly, because therapy centers were not available, people were able to buy products, pay for other services, and this was all money that was supposed to be allocated for therapy. So we're in quite a big confusing mess right now.
Yeah, and to keep things a little fair for me, I also created this before COVID. So,
Yeah.
COVID has changed things significantly. The cloud plan changed things significantly as well, because capacity is dwindling. It's being decimated because parents can't afford what they need with the 5,000 or 20,000. But I'm not saying at all. I hated that program prior to Coteau's plan, where they distinguished between IBI and ABA, which was ridiculous because they're both ABA. IBI is just intense ABA, but whatever.
Yeah. So we are getting a little inside baseball. I mean, because there's a very, very broad audience here, right? We've got newbies who are taking in all of this information. And then there's a bunch of us who are very, very familiar with the programs and how they worked or didn't work. Angela, you made a prediction in 2019 that the provincial government would underspend their budget by $20 million. How did you know
200.
$200 million, 20 million, 200 million.
20 million's a drop in the bucket.
I know. Hey, we could go to Disney World with that. $200 million. You made this prediction. How did you know that?
Well, that was simple math. I'll go to the next slide here. So I actually thought the budget was 600 million at the time, but we learned later that the budget for 2019 and 20 was 608 million. And we had approximately 10,000 kids in service at the time. This is going back to like last January, because I'm talking about the 2019 to 2020 fiscal year. We are coming to an end in a few months to the 2021 fiscal year. So I was able to calculate that, the 10,000 kids that are in service is about $330 to $360 million. And then there was about an additional 25,000 children that were on the wait list. And I calculated that at about 250 million. And I think the next slide we'll see how I did my calculation. And this government would have spent the full 600 million if 100% of that 25,000 received either a childhood budget or interim plan. But you can see here, it says, however, it is unlikely to be spent because, and I'll take a look here. Oh, and this is the calculation, right? So we knew actually through an FOI exactly how many kids there were under 6 and over 6. And I was able to calculate that the cost for all children, about 25,000, was going to be about 241,000. So that's the calculation that I did there. But what we knew in January, and this is before the ministry changed their website and they actually reported who was getting services as opposed to just invitations. So we could just extrapolate. By January, there was only about 4,000 kids that received a childhood budget. And if we
so have the government stopped posting just how many children are in service now? Is that information not available to us?
No, it's not.
So we don't know.
No, I don't know how many children are in service. We know how many invitations have been sent. We can try to extrapolate based on old numbers, but they stopped sharing. That's transparency for you. So very, very simple math, like just very on the surface. You can see we got about 25,000 kids. It's about 250 million. So it's about 10,000 or so on average per kid. So if there were about 5,000 kids that only got their budgets by the end of the fiscal year, then we're looking at about 50 million of that 250 million that would have been spent. So the shortfall would be roughly 200 million. And of course, I couldn't predict exactly how many children were going to get a childhood budget, but based on the numbers from the previous months as to how many childhood budgets were actually claimed, you could make an estimate for January and February and March and calculate that. And that's what I did. And I told them at the budget consultation that they're going to underspend by roughly 200 million. They didn't listen. They said that they would spend it.
I see.
Yeah, they told me I was wrong.
The Financial Accountability Office of Ontario, FAO, released a report about the Ontario Autism Program. Did they not?
They did.
So can you tell me a little bit about their findings?
Yeah, they proved me right.
They proved you right. Did you meet with the FAO?
We did. It was very exciting, actually. And now we have a connection, which is lovely. We met with Peter Weltman, the Financial Accountability Officer himself, as well as a number of people from the team. And the lovely thing about the meeting was that they were very, very receptive to continuous meetings. And what I was surprised about actually was how small their office is. You think the FAO is like this big organization. I don't know exactly how many people are there, but like under 30.
Yeah.
So it's a very small office. They do a lot of work there.
Yeah.
So the FAO report that came out, and I should let everybody know, the FAO reports are not audited. So they have to rely on the information that's given to them by the government accountants, the ministry accountants. So this is the report that they published. And what I was surprised about, actually, because I predicted that over 300 million, between 320 and 350 would be spent on needs-based services, but it was actually less. So this is very telling. This is telling us that as childhood budgets are increasing, those, what we coin legacy kids are decreasing. And that's sad, because this is the only group that actually is receiving or was receiving needs-based services. So we can see here that, about 270 million was spent on needs-based services. Other services, they actually spent 96.5 million on childhood budgets, and it was received. And then they tried to sneak this past us. They tried to accrue, and it's for those that don't know what an accrual is, it's an accounting term, and it basically means you can move forward expenses from the previous year to the current year as long as the money is accounted for. And so what they're saying here is, yeah, we have 100, and FAO, like me, likes to round up 174 million. We refer to it as 174. What they're saying is, well, there's 25,000 children that are supposed to get a childhood budget. So we can just accrue this 174 million to add up to our total budget of 608 million. It wasn't received. And what I still don't know, and I'm still trying to find out, I actually just emailed my contact at the Auditor General as to how this 174 million is calculated, because the way that I see it, it's based on 100% response rate. And we know in the real world that doesn't exist. So I'd like to know how this was calculated. But they tried to say, yeah, we spent this money. Yeah, look, we spent the whole 608 million. But then, I'll let you get to the next slide.
Well, Jay Lerner asked a very good question. He said, any information from the Auditor General report?
Yes, there was.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you for that question.
One thing I should mention about the FAO report, though, before we get to the Auditor General, is they actually, in the report, put in a directive to the MPPs saying, ask the Auditor General if this 174 million is allowed to be spent.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes,
even though, yeah.
That reminds me, I mean, I was, I don't understand half of this stuff, guys, but I was in that meeting with the FAO because I'm the pretty one, right?
Yeah.
And so some very interesting things happened. One of the things that happened that is really not about numbers and money that I've experienced many times tagging along with meetings with you, with Laura, with a bunch of other people, is the humanity.
Mm.
That there are people that are doing their jobs and there are parameters for their jobs. But the fact that they were willing to meet with us, to give us a hearing, and I see patterns. One of the first things that happens is that people are really scared of us in the beginning, because our reputation precedes us, right? And then after we start talking, they relax and their humanity kicks in. And they will do their best within the parameters of their job to help us get the information that we need. So we're talking about the Auditor General. Thank you so much for bringing that up, Jay. We happen to know something about that. Yes, Angela, that they categorized 174 million, not OAP dollars, as not allowed spending. What does that term not allowed spending? Are they not
Right.
allowed to spend that money? Like,
No,
what does that mean?
oh no, they are allowed to spend that money. So in December, the Auditor General comes out with the public accounts of Ontario, and it shows the spending. This is one of the appendices from the public accounts report. And you can see this is the Ontario Autism Program transfer payment. And the reason it's referred to as a transfer payment, and I'll go back here for a second. This was also a transfer payment. What that basically means is even though the money was claimed before the end of the fiscal year, it's paid out after the end of the fiscal year. So even though the money was sent after the end of March, it's part of the previous year's budget. Mm-hmm. So that's what a transfer payment is.
Some lady named Laura says, humanity kicking in is inevitable when people remember that these numbers represent people.
Children.
In
this case, children. Yeah.
Okay, so tell us about this not allowed thing.
Oh, how'd that happen? There we go. So if you also go to the, there's a link in the report and it takes you to an Excel file. You can see the exact amount that was spent on the Ontario Autism Program. And wouldn't you know, it's 608 million less 174. So
what? What? How could that be?
Well, the buggers underspent by almost 1/3 of the entire budget for 2019-2020.
That sounds a little bit close to $200 million, doesn't it?
Yeah, let's like round way up.
She predicts the future, everybody.
So this is the Auditor General report. And as I mentioned before, the FAO reports are not audited. The Auditor General reports are, and that's why they take months to be released. And basically what they're saying here is, yeah, the 95.6 million that you paid for the childhood budgets, that's allowed, that's fair. The other ones, nope, not allowed. It's not that the government's not allowed to spend it, they're not allowed to claim it as spending for the fiscal year of 2019-2020. But we have heard this message many times, or I have heard this message many times, that the current government has made a commitment to spend 1.2 billion over 2 fiscal years. So 2019-2020, which is the one we're talking about now, and the one we are currently in, which is, 20, I don't know, what year are we in? I don't even know.
2021, my friend.
20 to 21, yes. And that's going to be over in a few months. I looked at the Auditor General report that actually came out as well a little while ago, which had this current fiscal year up to Q2, up to the second quarter.
Q2 is?
Quarter two.
Okay.
Yeah, so there are 4 quarters in the year.
Okay.
So halfway through the year, it had spending, and it didn't really make a lot of sense. It looked like they spent a ton of money in the second quarter of the year. And I've been asking the ministry and yeah, and like the bureaucrat ministry and the political ministry staff, what they spent the money on. And I'm still waiting for a response because I don't know where that money is being spent. And it's much more difficult for me this year to calculate how much money they actually are going to spend, because as I mentioned before, the reporting on the ministry website changed drastically. So we can't even do these calculations really, because we have no idea as to how many kids are in what, how many kids are receiving childhood budgets versus interim one-time funding versus, the legacy program. We just know how many invitations have been sent, and I don't know what the response rate is. And I've been asking for the response rate for about a year.
And what do you mean by response rate?
So they are sending out the invitations. How many families are actually accepting them and filling it out and claiming them? We don't know. We don't know, but I know in the real world that it's never 100%. There's always going to be a situation where the invitation does not get accepted for whatever reason. It could be the wrong address. It could be that the family doesn't feel they need it anymore. It could be anything. So
are we able to track that money that doesn't get received or cashed? Is that tracked?
Not by us. We can't. No. Well, no, I don't know. So if the Auditor General will tell us what is spent, the FAO can tell us what the ministry tells them is spent. The Auditor General will tell us actually what is spent, but whatever is not spent, we don't know where that goes.
Is there any way we can find out?
We can do a freedom of information and request that information.
I see. And who can do that?
Anybody.
Anybody can do
Anybody. Yeah, it's an FOI, freedom of information. It's a bit tedious. You have to fill out the forms. I did one a few years ago. I think it cost $5. I think it still is $5. I'm not sure. It's not a huge expense in terms of money, but it is a huge expense in terms of time. You really have to ask very specifically what you're looking for. Otherwise, you won't get it. And then even if you do ask what you're looking for, they still make it difficult to look through. Yeah, I don't know why, but it makes me concerned, because if they want us to trust them, then that transparency needs to be there, and it hasn't been there for a very long time.
Jay asks, could they have been deemed to have been spent by other ministries for autism service? Example, education or social services. So can that?
No, it can't go into, well, what they choose to do is up to them. But the Ontario Autism Program budget should stay within the Ontario Autism Program. They shouldn't be allowed to move that money. If they do, at the end of the day, they can do whatever the hell they want. They're the government. But our budget is it was 608 million for the previous year. This year, it will be 1.2 billion minus 174 million, plus 174 million minus $608 million.
Tara says, sounds like the system uses confusion to their advantage. Is this a big shell game?
I wouldn't say it's confusion so much as just outright, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Opaqueness. Is that a word?
So the lack of transparency.
Yeah, it's not that they're confusing us. It's just hidden.
Is this lying?
If you believe that, by omitting things is lying, then yes. Like lying through omission, yes. Are they
Angela?
outright telling us wrong information? No, they're just not telling us information.
Laura says, oh, she's just making a comment about freedom of information requests. When I teach about this in my civics classes, I always joke that an FOI request is the most fun you can have with your government for $5. So this costs $5 to file a request. Angela, it's been almost a year since our last huge demonstration at Queen's Park. Has anything of note happened yet in terms of news from the province on funding?
In terms of news, there have been some things of note. In terms of action, no. So, well, going back to our first rally 2 years ago, of course, there was some big news in terms of them saying that they will change from this program, this funding program, to a needs-based program. So that was a big win. But then they took so darn long. We had to protest again. And they're saying things like, they implemented foundational services and those kinds of things. But those services existed. All they did was bring them back. So do I feel like they've done anything of note? No, not yet. Not until we actually see core services being offered. We're still in this, they gave it a different name. They called it the one-time interim funding as opposed to the McLeod's childhood budget. We're still in the McLeod childhood budget program for all the new children that are coming into the program. The only children that are getting needs-based services are the ones that are grandfathered in to the old OAP.
Mm-hmm. This feels like purgatory to me.
Yeah, it kind of is. We're kind of in a place where we're stuck.
Mm-hmm.
We're stuck. They keep telling us to wait. And what they don't understand, and I think I said this in an interview like a year ago, is they keep saying they want to take their time to get it right, but taking so long just intrinsically is wrong, because the longer they take, the more services get decimated, the more time children are waiting, the more these children are going without. And there is the compounding of the pandemic, of course, now, and that is outside of our control. There's nothing we can do about that. Mm-hmm. But at the very least, we should be trying to get some children into services, even if it's virtual, but at least meeting their needs.
Well, I mean, the premier is giving cooking classes during COVID. He seems to have had time to master those techniques, and a lot of people have learned to knit and crochet and split the atom during this long hiatus that we're in. What's the hold up here?
I don't know. The previous Liberal government did it in 92 days or something. This government needs 3 years. We need to find a term here. Just this generation of kids, we can just call them like Ford's lost generation or something, because he has caused an entire cohort of children huge distress, immense crisis for these families. There were families that were at the top of the wait list when McLeod froze the wait list that had been waiting for up to 4 years. Now we've tacked on more, at least 2 years. So 6 years? If you got your child diagnosed, and the average age in Canada is around 4, if you got your child diagnosed at the average age of about 4, and you put your child on the wait list and you were close to the top of the list, your child is 10 and had no access to service. And that breaks my heart.
6 years.
For these families. And this government doesn't get it. They don't get it. They don't understand that the longer they take, the more damage they're doing.
6 years, about as long as it takes to earn a master's degree, right?
I did mine in a year and a half, but sure.
Yeah, from your undergraduate to the end, right?
With your undergrad, sure.
Yeah, 6 years. You know, that's nothing to a kid, right? So we talked a lot about waiting. We did have a little bit of news from the province, and there are 3 things I want to ask you about. I want to ask you about care coordinators, the independent intake organization, and the needs assessment tool. These things, they sound good. Do you have any red flags for, let's just start with the first one, care coordinator?
So many red flags. So let me just explain the structure as I understand it.
Okay.
So the independent intake organization, the IIO, is basically the top of the pyramid. And within the IIO, the care coordinators will be housed. And we know from the call for applications document, and that was shared on the OAC website, that it's a maximum of 80, it's a caseload of 80, a maximum per care coordinator. And we know that there are, now I think there's about 45,000, but I'm going to round it down. It's the only time I'm rounding down to about 40,000 because it makes head math.
Whoa, wait a minute. So 2 years ago, there were 23,000 kids on wait lists, and now there's 45. 45?
About 40, I'm rounding, but about 45.
Okay, as you were.
Yeah. And there are many reasons for that. I don't know all of them. I can take guesses, but I'm not going to do that now.
Okay.
That's a whole hour on itself.
Yes, it is. Bruce? I'm looking at my phone like he's there. You know, Bruce? Tell us why, Bruce. Over. Yeah.
So you have the IIO, then you have the care coordinators, and doing very basic head math with a caseload of 80, they would need roughly 500 care coordinators. So the IIO has to be huge enough to be able to hire 500 care coordinators. Of course, it will have to be built up over time, because I'm not sure if everybody saw the small detail in the call for applications document. They are not expecting the IIO to be fully operational until about 2023 to 2024. So
2023 to 2024.
That is correct. Yeah.
So how many years are we talking now? We already have families waiting 6 years. What's that now?
Well, but the children that have been waiting should be already in, hopefully.
Yeah.
Because they did commit to getting 8,000 children off the wait list once core services were available, but they never actually defined when the core services would be fully operational. And it wasn't that they said it would be available, that it would be fully operational. And I can't see. So the this fiscal year,
the Death Star will be fully operational in 2023. Is that's the word? Is that the word on the street, or are you confident with that information?
Well, that's what it says in the call for applications document.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I may be paraphrasing fully operational because I don't have the document in front of me, but that's basically what they said, that it'll be at full capacity or fully operational or whatever language they use. If anybody wants to look it up, they can They
We can
can,
do that.
you
So
can do the quote.
this IIO Independent Intake Organization, who are they?
Well, we don't know. That's what the call for applications was for. We don't know who's going to be the IIO, but it has to be a very large company or agency. And, you know, they call it a call for applications. In my previous life, we just called it an RFP, a request for proposal. So there's going to be a bunch of companies that are going to be sending in their applications or their proposals. And then it's up to the government to choose who this agency will be, but they are supposed to be a third arm party. You know, they should be nonpartisan. Who they're going to be, I don't know, but it has me very concerned because I can't think of any company or agency that has that kind of capacity. A great concern of mine is it's going to be some company from the US that's going to come up here and start taking over. Yeah, it could be anybody. We don't know, but it has to be a very large organization.
Yeah, they can handle all of that.
So that's the IIO. Then there's the care coordinators. And what's scary about the care coordinators is we don't know their exact qualifications, but we do know that they are not going to be clinicians. And why that's scary is the third part of this. The care coordinators are going to be implementing something called a needs assessment tool. Now, I've asked multiple times about this needs assessment tool. And as a statistician, to develop a tool like this would take me about a year or so, because first you have to develop all the variables that go into it. By variables, I mean like, you know, what are the things that they're actually measuring. I wouldn't know. I'd have to develop that. And then the very large part of it is testing. So in the stats world, especially in social science, you know, you're looking at things like reliability and validity. And those are very, very important when you're looking at building these kinds of tools. Reliability is a very simple concept. It means that it's generalizable. It's applicable across the population. You know, and validity, I don't even want to get into validity. When I did my master's, I struggled with that concept.
Yeah, you're already losing me, and you're already losing me. So,
but nonetheless,
yeah,
we don't know anything about this tool. We don't know how it's being built, and it's a standardized process. And if you go back to the very, very, very beginning of our conversation when we were talking about needs-based therapy, I said we don't rely on norms-based tools. This would be a norms-based tool. It would be a standardized tool.
Right.
So, and they're going to be implementing it.
Yeah.
And then what is even scarier is that wouldn't be needs-based, because needs-based is individualized. This is
ever changing.
And ever changing.
Ever changing.
And I don't know this for sure because we don't have that information yet, but they were talking about the needs assessment tool putting kids into categories. That is not needs-based. Actually, that is very clearly defined as not needs-based. Yeah, programs and services based on categories of disability is the complete opposite of needs-based.
It sounds discriminatory to me. I don't know what our legal minds think.
I don't like the current plan is very discriminatory because discriminates on age, based on age. Is this discriminatory? I'm not an expert.
Yeah.
Maybe, depending on how you define discrimination, but definitely the current plan is that is without question.
It certainly is removing the human element completely, isn't it? So
Yes.
any child having a strong relationship with the clinician and the parents working together with the child to determine the level of care and intervention that the child needs, completely removed from the process. I mean, it may be, yes, maybe not discriminatory, but it sounds very sci-fi, very cold, very calculating.
Yes.
And what human being, what if you take, okay, this kid needs a little bit of speech and a little bit of movement, a little bit of OT, a little bit of behavioral, mix it all into a pot, and we're going to trust in an algorithm to determine the level of service rather than observation from professionals.
And like I said, these care coordinators are not clinicians. Now, there's a couple of things as an individual and as a board member that I'm fighting for. There's not many hills I will die on. There's one hill I will die on, and that is the recommendation from the advisory panel report, and that is the clinician should always have the final say. And I am prepared to die on that hill.
Yes, that's been a long-standing demand of the OAC, and it's definitely a deal breaker for all of us. Okay, so we're going to wind down. That was an awful lot of information. Before we go, Miss Angela, what's the OAC going to do about these issues?
Well, we're
How
going
are
to
we going to alert the public? What are we going to do? What should people do? Can you give us 3 good tips of what a parent or someone who cares about children who require service could do right now?
meet with your MPPs. Continue to, they're taking meetings, even if they are virtual. We have a new organization at the OAC, well, a new working group or
Branch?
committee.
Yep.
Committee, I don't know. Well, it's a committee, right? It's the Political
Sure.
Action Committee, the
Yep.
PAC. It's being chaired by our very own Sean Stadden and Tony Stravato, otherwise known as the Beard, and Sean from the North. So they are the co-chairs. Reach out to them, please, if you want to try and set up a meeting with your MPP. They are currently working on an MPP toolkit. I've spoken to them about different ideas. They're putting it all together. So please reach out to them. Please meet with your MPPs. Continue to tell the story. Make it personal. Now that we're virtual, have your kids as part of the meeting, even if it's for 1 minute. Show their face. These are the things that we need to continue to do. We write letters to the politicians, sure, but write editorial pieces. One of the most important things, it used to be, and it still is, are the local papers, the neighborhood papers. Those are the papers that your grandma reads, right? And we all need grandmas on our sides, and grandpas for that matter. Write for your local papers. I mean, getting an editorial piece in like the Star or whatever is huge, but if you can get one in my neighborhood and the Downsview Advocate or whatever it is in your neighborhood, that just educates your neighbors. Get an OAC lawn sign, because people will drive by and see it. And talk to your friends, talk to your family. Bring printouts. I do. I know it's annoying, but I don't know if you have family like mine, but they don't really believe anything unless it's on paper. Clip a newspaper article, show it to your friends.
That's a good one for grandmas.
Yeah. And ask them, if they live in a different riding from you, especially if it's family, ask them to schedule a meeting with their MPP for your child. Even if they don't have a child with autism, your child is family, and that matters. I schedule appointments in my mom's riding, and she doesn't even speak English, but that's fine.
So our top three recommendations, you would say, Angela, contact your MPP, right?
Yeah.
Look out for the OAC's kits to help you. We will help you learn how to speak to an MPP.
Yeah.
They
And
have talking points and will have talking points for you, right?
reach
And
out to
third,
Sean Stadden and Tony Stravato.
check in with Sean and Tony, and I'll tag them on this post so you can find them. And thirdly,
Write letters, articles. So if you can't set up a meeting, write a letter, write an email, write your local paper. Just do as much writing as you possibly can.
wonderful.
Spread the word.
Last question.
Oh, okay.
Ashley Ann says, oh, wait a minute. Yes. One last question before we wind down. Ashley Ann says, my MPP is ignoring me. Angela, you told me a story once about how you insisted on getting a meeting with your MPP. Would you share
Well,
that story?
my MPP is gone a little off the rails lately.
Oh, really? Interesting.
But I'll tell you my personal story. So as soon as McLeod made the announcement, I called my MPP within 15 minutes. He wouldn't meet with me. He offered to do a phone call, and I said sure. He kept trying to get me off the phone, but I kept keeping him on the line, trying to make him accountable, saying, these are my questions. Pose questions, always have questions so that there's follow-up. I said, these are my questions. And, he kept saying, this isn't my strength. I don't have competency in this. And my response to that was, you are my elected official for my riding. You are my representative. I don't care if this is your forte or not. You should go back to the people from the ministry whose job it is to do this and get me the answers. Because I don't care if you're not an expert in autism. That's not your job. Your job is to be a politician and to represent me. And if I can't get the answers from the ministry, it's your job to get those answers from the ministry. And so I think just to get me off the phone, he said, fine. And I told him that I would follow up in 2 weeks if I didn't hear back. So he didn't follow up. But this was a different time. This is pre-COVID. So I was driving by his constituency office. It was exactly 2 weeks later. So I walked right on in. He happened to be in, and the staff was trying to tell me not to stay, that he's busy, that they can make an appointment for me at a later date. And I said, oh, if he's here, it's cool. I plopped my butt down on the chair and I said, I'll wait. And then we developed a bit of a working relationship after that. It was just about being really, really annoying and persistent. And I think that's what you got to do. It's harder now because you can't show up in person, but just send an email every day and say, you are my elected representative. Represent me, damn it. And just, be that annoying fly that constantly buzzes. Eventually they will meet you. But at the end of the day, I do have to say that honey is better than vinegar. But if honey doesn't work,
whatever it takes.
Try
whatever
being the bee.
Yeah. Angela, thank you so much. We gave people an awful lot of information, and this was quite a slog. There are a number of people in the Ontario Autism Coalition who are like Angela, who take the time to look at data. They love data, look at the numbers, figuring out how much money has been spent, accessing all kinds of information. And I, for one, am grateful to these people because then I don't have to do it. So I hope that those people who stuck with us or who will catch this live, that they will find this helpful. We'll try to keep doing this. We'll try to get better at sharing the technical stuff when it comes to money, numbers, governments, wait lists, and we'll try to get as much information to you as we possibly can. Angela, thank you so much. And I hope we can continue. That next time we meet, I'd really like to talk about education issues, as she's put just as much work into putting together reports and surveys on education as she has with the OAP. And boy, are we glad she's part of our team. Maybe Laura, I'll look at my phone again because, like, I think maybe Laura's inside my phone, right? Maybe Laura, you'll join us too when we talk about
I,
education.
we should also say that Karen does a tremendous job as well.
Yeah, I
So
told you I'm the pretty one. Bruce, Carrie, Pat, Scott, Jay, Laura, thank you so much for all your comments. Everyone else, good night. I hope this was helpful. We'll just keep on trucking, eh? Angela, thank you so much.
thank you so much.
Good night, everybody.
Bye, everybody.